Okay, it is November 15th, 2023, and I am interviewing Theo Grayson, the head of the Adolescent classroom at Mountainside Montessori in Marshall, Virginia. How are you today?
Lovely.
Great. My name is Stewart. Everyone should probably know my name by now, but we're just going to say it. So I'm going to start with a few general questions. Where did you go to college, and where did you get your education?
I actually graduated high school in 3 years and went to Colorado State out in Fort Collins, Colorado, and went with the intention to do agriculture and was not interested in learning about monoculture and just not the agriculture I was thinking of,
Right.
having a farm here in Virginia. So I took a year off and spent the first half of that year actually coaching soccer and working in the athletic department at my high school, and then went to Nepal and spent 4 or 5 months in Nepal doing a semester abroad, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And then I transferred to St. Lawrence University in upstate New York, and during that time also did another semester abroad in Indonesia.
Okay.
So, but I actually did graduate from St. Lawrence in regular time.
Right.
Then after that, I was working in Lake Placid at a farm and garden school and ended up getting my master's degree in education from Goddard College.
Okay, cool. So you got your bachelor's first, and then you did another little trip or little adventure, and then you moved back and you went back and you got your master's.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually sounds way cooler than just going and doing the 4 years right away. You talked about a little bit about your high school years. Where did you grow up, and kind of what was your learning like? Was it more like kind of Montessori, or were you like public school learner, or were you homeschooled?
So I actually, when I was, I think maybe 3, I went to a Montessori school, which I remember a couple images very vividly.
Yeah.
But never really thought about it again, and then went into a private system, and most of my education was in Washington, D.C. at a private school, Sidwell Friends, which is a Quaker school.
Okay.
So, and I've always felt like the Montessorians and the Quakers are very much in alignment. A lot is based on really tight community, very much student involvement. Decisions are made by consensus, which means the whole student body is involved. I think it's probably changed some since I was there, but
right.
So that really kind of instilled sort of self-directed learning and high standards, but also that students had a voice, and there was a fair amount of hands-on, and they didn't call themselves alternative at the time, but it definitely had a slightly different approach.
Right. So you've kind of been around Montessori type learning kind of your whole academic
looking
career.
Back, it wasn't necessarily Montessori, but I feel like they're parallel paths trying
Right.
to get to a similar place where they're really looking at the whole person,
Mm-hmm.
not just the academic. And then, interesting enough, when I did my Montessori training, the woman who was my Montessori teacher when I was 3 and used to come to our farm, and I have lots of siblings and cousins, and
Yeah.
would come to our farm and somehow had to manage us in some form. She opened her own school that I ended up being connected with when I was living in Connecticut, and her son was in my training program, and it was like full circle.
Oh, wow.
There was Mary Lou Cobb again back in my life, and it was really cool.
Yeah, that's crazy how you just kept on bumping into each other. That's actually really interesting. My next question would be what made you want to become a teacher, and was she kind of impacting that a little bit?
Becoming a teacher was not a planned path. So I graduated from St. Lawrence. I moved to the Adirondacks. St. Lawrence is on the west side, outside the Adirondacks, and I moved to the Lake Placid area, and just started, finding my way. I was doing all kinds of working in a outdoor gear shop. I was farming. I was figuring it out.
Right.
And there was a school that needed some help in their gardens. So I was living on a farm in exchange for doing some work there and kind of taking care of their animals. And across the street was a school called North Country School, which again is completely parallel with Montessori, but it's not a Montessori school.
Yeah.
Very hands-on, very outdoor oriented. So I started in the garden, and then it just evolved to, well, we need this and we need that, and then I became a full-time
Right.
Teacher. But it also was a boarding school. At the time it was 4th through 8th graders, boarding. So
Yeah.
you were really like a mom.
Yeah, with them all the time.
You did everything
taking care of
with them. And then I had one 3rd grader and one 2nd grader because they had older siblings. Now the school, I believe, goes through 9th grade. But they were completely, we raised chickens and pigs, and we had llamas and horses, and we had all the farm stuff. They had a big garden which the summer camp kind of managed. So
Right.
a lot of the food came off the farm. And it was very outdoor oriented. To graduate, you had to climb a couple mountains. We were always
That's awesome.
we were always out in the mountains doing crazy stuff, and even in the winter we would hike out and build snow caves and stay the night out. And
Yeah.
so it was very much connected with nature, but also very project, very land-based, and very, very student-oriented.
So when you chose like your path, like, I'm just thinking in terms of like, whether or not you wanted to become like a more traditional teacher where it's like more public school or private school, or like Montessori. You kind of grew up around nature, so it kind of just felt natural to go the Montessori route. I think.
Yeah, and farming.
Yeah,
so
farming,
it
true.
was really kind of, it just felt like that should be part of education, not to make people farmers, but because of what you learn around yourself, taking care of something else, being responsible for other things, using your body, being connected to food, being connected to the earth.
Yeah.
All those things felt like it nurtured the whole person, as well as the academic and curiosities,
Right.
sort of following those. So I was there, and then I got out of teaching for just a little bit and did a lot of other farm-related, adventure-related things, and then ended up moving to Vermont and was involved with a Putney School, which is a high school, co-ed high school, also a farm and garden school.
Of course.
And actually also worked at an all-boys school for pretty significant dyslexic boys, so that was really interesting. And then my husband and I moved to Connecticut and worked at an all-boys boarding school, high school called South Kent School, which was way more traditional for us than what I had been doing, but it was sort of it had a lot of land, and it was kind of trying to figure out how to use that land, how to get the particularly boys outside using their bodies, not just through athletics. So it was kind of in an evolution, which was interesting, and it evolved over the years that we were there. But then when I had kids, actually my husband was out bike riding one day and saw this Montessori school, and in his little Lycra suit walked into the school and was like, "What are you guys about?" And so we went and checked it out, and then our own kids started Montessori, and then that school just pulled me in, and then I was there for 10 or 11 years.
Oh, wow.
So I worked there
And
in the adolescent
did
program.
Did your children go to that school as well
Yes.
with you?
So they went pretty much all the way through, and that school ended in 8th grade. So I was doing math, science, and then you're, involved with, you have advisees and a group who you're working with. I created a whole program called The Hero's Journey, which is kind of helping students figure out who am I and who do I want to be,
Right.
Through all kinds of things of stretching them, making them go on hikes, making them jump into freezing cold rivers, things like that.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of cool to develop that whole program, and that was all based on Joseph Campbell's work of A Hero's Journey. And then I became the athletic director there on top of that. And then when Alden graduated from South Count, where we were living, and my husband was still working, the all-boys school, we moved down here to Virginia, and that's when Edel and I found each other,
Yeah.
and it was like the perfect match.
Been here ever since.
And been here ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mountainside sort of just is perfect for what I think adolescence and Montessori is. My
Mhm.
previous school was a great school, but definitely more traditional in that their clientele were moving on to mostly private, more traditional schools, just because of the area it was in,
Right.
more
Yeah.
than anything. So
Okay. Geez, you've had you've had quite
Yeah.
the journey of academics and nature, especially. What is Montessori teaching to you? Because I see that you're more in adolescence and primary. I mean, Montessori is more primary oriented and kind of lower school oriented. So just like looking at it from like a like adolescent lens, what is kind of Montessori for older children in schooling?
And I think it's an open question a little bit, because Maria Montessori died before she really developed the adolescent program.
Right. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of space for interpretation, where up until then it was very clear. And the materials were clear, and the planes of development were very clear, and kind of the programs were really pretty defined. So in theory, if you walk into any Montessori school, it should kind of look and feel similar in terms of materials and the learning process.
Yeah.
And what they're targeting. Obviously, every school has their own environment that and kind of vibe.
But even she described it in her handbook with like there's supposed to be colors everywhere, and it's supposed to have like a good energy in the room, and it's supposed to be like inspirational and not like kind of dull and
Yeah.
yeah.
So in theory, there's sort of some pretty clear guidelines up until you get to adolescence. And then there's very few adolescent programs, and it's much more open, because it was much more theory at that point and not as concrete, I think. And of course, because she lived over 100 years ago, the farm was something that was much more relevant in most people's lives.
Yeah.
So the fact that we have a farm here, I feel very fortunate. But as I said, I think the farm component is not to make farmers, but meet the needs of this developmental stage of life, which is big muscle work. These bodies are changing drastically. Their minds are changing. Their brains are developing in really significant ways. And students really are eager, and their bodies really need to use this big muscle work where they're digging holes and carrying heavy things and using tools and all of those things, while also being connected with the earth, being connected with nature, and running a business that happens to be animals.
Yeah.
So that you're responsible for something beyond yourself. And then, of course, in adolescence, they're trying to figure out, how do I fit into society? At a younger age, they're like, how do I fit into my family? They've got that part figured out, although that's sort of a lifelong journey anyway. But,
Right.
So now they're looking at what's my role in the world, how do I contribute, how do I fit into society, and the best way to do that in a real and meaningful way is through the economy. And Montessori is real and meaningful based. We're not interested in do a worksheet just to get it done. It has to be somehow connected with something that's truly meaningful and real in your life at these different stages. So at adolescence is the most social time in people's lives. So they're really figuring out not only my peer group, but just how do I fit into this thing called society? So having an ability to what we call have a microeconomy and businesses. In our program, we have many, many businesses, is super important because it's real. You're dealing with outside companies, you're dealing with, outside vendor, we have to buy food for the pigs, we're marketing, we're selling products,
And
we're
that's it.
processing, we're doing all these different components of running a business.
Right, and not to mention you're taking care of real living things. Like
Right.
if you don't take care of them, they will
They die.
suffer.
and
They
that's on
die.
you. Yeah.
There's like a huge responsibility that comes along with that. And I think that's definitely a life skill. Is like how do I take care of a living thing, and how do I, also learning like respecting the animals and learning the process of farm to table. I think is a huge thing because it's out in the world and not many people like to know about it. But that's just how things work, and it's great that you've been teaching this. But that actually kind of leads into my next question is, Maria herself speaks to the importance of like touch, feel, and being in nature. What have you observed in your teaching that is just so important about this aspect of Montessori? And how does it change based on the child's age? Because I know that like normally in primary and everything, they're more into like garden work, and she kind of highlights that where there are plants in the classrooms in Montessori classrooms, like you're supposed to be around living things and have something to take care of. But also in adolescence, you kind of go up a level, and now you're taking care of real living beings and animals. And I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit. We kind of already discussed it a little.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that our society in general, certainly in America, I think worldwide, is getting less detached from the living world, where it's very easy to be very detached from where your food comes from. You just go to the store and you buy it and it comes off the shelf, and So one of the things with raising animals is how they're raised, how you manage the earth, how you manage the land, because if you manage the land well, you have healthy animals. You have a healthy cow if the grass is good, but the grass is good because the land is good.
Yeah.
And the soil is good.
And that comes from the cow.
Right. And so we talk a lot about things like the carbon footprint of our pigs, the carbon footprint of our turkeys. Our turkeys have about a probably 15-mile radius of their entire life, and our pigs are maybe 25 or 30-mile radius. And you may have been here when we watched Food Inc., which is disturbing.
It is.
But how most of our meat focuses on more is
it's the real world. It's how
the
things
real world,
work.
right? So that you have choices and power in, goes back to the business and the economy. Like you have power in your buying choices, but also just putting those thoughts into people's minds about thinking about where your food comes from, how it's raised, what do you choose to support or not support through your dollar. And through your own lifestyle kind of thing. So those I think are really important, and I think as we become more disconnected as humans, and certainly disconnected from the land and the earth and the sort of world, having those opportunities where you're not engaged in electronics, and you're using your hands and you're using your body and you're connected, collaborating with each other, problem solving with each other, working together as a team, and taking care of something have this big purpose really makes a difference.
Right.
So one of the big questions we were sort of talking about, what's for me one of the main goals of adolescence is the question of who do you want to be? And I know in my schooling, my middle school, high school years were really kind of good luck, and I hope you come out the other side like a decent human being.
Yeah.
And it was very oriented on kind of nurturing your intellect, and we did have a lot of experiences which helped me navigate that social world and kind of figure out my place, which I'm grateful for. But nobody really asked me, who do I want to be? And I think that's a pretty powerful question of like, who do you want to be? Because I think all of us should ask ourselves that every day for the rest of our lives. And if you have that image or areas that you're working on, you're more likely to move towards that than just kind of ping pong around in life.
Yeah.
And I always have said, I think your experience too was just think about people you admire. What is it that you admire about them? And those are characteristics that perhaps you want to nurture in yourself. Maybe you already have them. Maybe there's something you want to work on. But it kind of helps you define that, like, who do I want to be? And what kind of person, how do I want to contribute to the world? So I think that's really my main goal of this opportunity of education, because it is so holistic. And that can be, do you want to be a curious person? Do you want to be a deep learner? Do you want to be somebody who asks a question and actually goes and, has the resources to find that answer? Or at least begin to find that answer.
Yeah.
Do you always want to be learning something new? Do you want to be open to different kinds of people and different kinds of culture and, see the world as an interesting place to explore? So there's all that sort of intellectual, but then there's like, who do you actually want to be as a person? Do you want to be somebody who's got a great sense of humor and is patient and open to other people and can listen well and be kind and, contribute to things in a larger way than beyond yourself?
Yeah.
So that's really, to me, really the core of this age is starting, as you're starting to become a real individual, kind of starting to look at yourself as like, who do I want to be? Because I'm not my parents. I'm at a point where I don't have to agree with everything. I'm starting to realize I have my own thoughts or my own opinions. And you're kind of starting that really independent journey. And I think it's just such a good guiding question to always think about.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because not everyone can answer that question. And if you can figure it out, at a young age, I think you can have a much happier life. Versus if you're just constantly struggling to figure out what you want to do or what can make you happy, it can be stressful. But I feel like I'd want to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, which is great. But that's sort of part of who you want to be. It's like I want to be interested in a lot of different things, and I just think very few educational systems even ask that question. I think they might be going for it indirectly, but I don't think they really put it out there. And sometimes you have to be pretty direct, it was really helpful to me when I asked myself that question versus I'm having these great experiences, it's helping me figure out what I do and don't want, but just that question of who do you want to be? And then when we all mess up, we all do things we're not proud of in a certain moment, or say something in tone don't mean. And you have this opportunity to sort of say, is that really who I want to be? And, we say in adolescence, you kind of hold the mirror up, is that really what you meant?
Yeah.
And you have that opportunity in this safe environment to just sort of say, no, I didn't realize it looked like that. and sort of have that self-reflection, because I think particularly in this world of social media that consumes us, I'm finding less and less people are comfortable just being with themselves, just having time and space to be alone and to sit with yourself. And that's when you have moments to reflect. But if you're always sort of consumed in this everybody else's world kind of thing, it's a lost opportunity. And I just think that's harder and harder for young people who are growing up in this age of, whatever, social intrigue via the cyber world,
Right. And you definitely, social media, you can kind of shut out your emotions, and really it kind of brainwashes you to be like, follow one path or be one person,
Mm-hmm.
only act this way, don't act this way. It's very much, it can kind of manipulate you. So I can see how that definitely applies.
And it also makes you, I think it sets it up so people are always comparing themselves to something else that really probably isn't completely real, because you're only getting a snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody posts on social media how bad their day went.
Yeah.
It's only the good stuff, and which is great in one side, but so everybody's life looks kind of perfect, but that's not the case. And then there's this sort of odd standard that, like you're saying, is the norm, and if you're outside of that in any way, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And so that part, I think it's just a really challenging time to sort of grow up in that and have to navigate that. It's a whole nother layer that I didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to do that.
So you're kind of you're making sure to highlight it in your class. You're making sure your students understand that it's perfectly okay to reflect and be with yourself, and not worry so much about what other people are invested in.
Find your self and your interests and your talents and your passions, and everybody brings talents to the group, and also everybody brings challenges. But your challenges are different than my challenges, but we all have them, and that's okay. And we also all have talents that we bring.
Yeah.
And that's really important, that as we're like a micro society, our little adolescent community is a micro society. We're practicing being adults. And, it's not always smooth. People still leave dirty dishes in the sink.
Right.
Shocking. But we figure it out together. We problem solve together in a safe way where we can support each other. And we have to function as this little community. So all of those things are practicing the adult world. And as nothing in life, like your music, you don't just pick up, drumsticks and you're fantastic. It takes a lot of hard work and practice.
Yeah.
And that's the same with just being a human and navigating the world and going from adolescence to adult. It requires some practice, and that's okay. And also I'd say the other thing is, definitely in American society, we're a win and lose mindset. You've either won or you've lost. Like, if you're second, you lost. You didn't, you weren't successful. And we have these sort of interesting standards, and so I think a lot of it is accepting that actually when we make mistakes and life is hard is when we learn. That's actually the only time we learn, because if things are easy and going well, we don't really need to change much. Things are great, but I'm really not learning anything. So it's when life is the hardest that we learn the most, and we learn the most about ourselves. And to embrace that as, instead of something that you avoid and push away, as an opportunity. I think it's simply just a different mindset.
Yeah.
That mistakes are opportunities to learn, and often the only way we learn. How many things on the farm do you make a mistake and you do it once and you never have to do it again? But what a great learning opportunity, So we don't do grades. We don't do sort of anything that creates rewards. We don't do anything that creates competition. So because there's no winners and losers, we're all just navigating and meeting life where we are, and we're supporting each other in that. So that's another very different mindset from some more traditional schools.
No, definitely. Yeah, I mean, when I got out of Montessori, I was really grade focused, and I was kind of just like, wow, I never really had to think about this before now, and now I'm just like, if I don't make this grade, like I don't pass, I fail.
Right.
And it can be very stressful, and you know, my next question would be like, can you talk a little bit about like the benefits and challenges of such a diverse range of ages in the classroom? Because you know, there's a sense of community in a Montessori classroom, but it can also be, you know, challenging at times, like you said, because I mean, for this classroom, I think it's 6 to 9, right? Grades 6th through 9th, I think.
7 through 9.
7 through 9.
7, 8, 9.
Right. So it can be a little bit challenging at times, and it can also be very beneficial. But yeah, I don't know if you've run into.
I don't really. When I look at our group, and even when I look at individuals, I honestly kind of forget about grade levels, since we don't measure people in that way. Everybody's in their own place, but they are on a developmental plane that makes sense for them. You know, they're kind of developmentally in the same place, but you might be at the beginning of that plane or at the end of that plane, ready to leap to the next one. So in that 3 years, you have gotten to a place where you're completely ready. When students at the end of 9th grade are like, I'm so done and so ready to be out of here, I'm like, perfect, because you're ready to leap, you know? And so sometimes it can be challenging. There's definitely a 3-year variance in adolescence can feel huge. You know, it's like, oh, those annoying young 7th graders, or oh my gosh, those 9th graders are so old and, you know, whatever, hairy and stinky or something. But I think that it's really important for older students to help support the younger ones. And that's in all the environments. It's, you know, we learn really well when we have to teach something, and that can be academic, or it can be how do you serve pizza, and how do you do Field and Maine seedlings program, and how do you take care of the animals, and so all those opportunities to teach and to be supportive. But then it also really works for, you know, I say you can learn anything in life, but if you don't have skills to be kind, collaborate with others, be eager to learn something new, be open to learning and also open to feedback, and be a good working partner to problem solve with other people and have a strong work ethic, then I'm not really interested in hiring you. Like, those are the skills that make somebody successful, not that I know a ton about a subject, but I really can't do any of those other things, because you can learn anything. So those are really the skills that we're going for. And so in this really subtle, indirect way, without students really thinking about it, they're learning all those skills by just functioning as a little community.
Yeah.
And all the responsibilities. We don't have a cleaning crew here. They are the cleaning crew. So if something's dirty and they're, you know, thinking, oh, this is kind of gross, then we're the cleaning crew.
Yeah.
You know, we're taking care of our own environment. It's not somebody else. You know, how we support the larger community, all those things are skills that I really value and think in the long run, that's what makes you successful, along with planning and time management, which is huge.
Yes.
Not, you know, what were my grades? Because on paper, an A student can be a great person or can kind of be a jerk, but a good student. And
Yeah.
that's all it says, is that your brain works in this system. I have no idea how hard you work for that grade. I have no idea who you are as a person. I have no idea how you contribute, how you support other people, how you collaborate with other people. I don't know any of that. All I know is that this system works for you, and you can be successful in the way that we judge in that system.
Yeah, and I think standardized testing is so crazy how you can, like, I mean, I'm preparing for college and everything, and it's just so wild that like a grade can determine whether or not you get into college and everything like
Yeah.
that. But people never really take the time to look at a student and look at a person for who they are personality wise versus, like you said, grade wise. They might be very smart, but
And what
they
their
might
life
not be
story
good with
is,
they might not be
you
good
know?
with time management or like
Right.
problem solving skills, like you said,
Yeah.
which are highlighted in this way of learning. So I think it's definitely
And also just their life story. Our system is set up to the haves, to people who have the resources, have a family life, have all those things where, you and I are very lucky. We don't have to worry about where our food comes from. We don't have to worry if we're going to have heat. We don't have to worry. But if I was going to school hungry and cold and not knowing what my, who may or may not be home, or if I even have a home, that's a hard place to be interested in what's going on with the Greeks. It just like that's a hard place. So our system is definitely set up to cater to, the success of certain. Not that there aren't people who are successful on all ends, but
yeah.
it just, and that's partly why our international trips that I've done. I know you went to Costa Rica in the middle of COVID, which was challenging.
Yeah, so
your experience was slightly different just because we couldn't be in the community in the same way that we would. But, my guidelines are go somewhere that won't be the same in your lifetime, which really means a second or third world country. And obviously to stretch people, but learn how most of the world lives and what we can do to contribute in some way. And I know, our experience in Costa Rica was kind of a wildlife rehab center, but we weren't really able to work with other people because of the COVID restrictions.
yeah.
But then, Nora's in Ecuador, we had snotty kids crawling all over us, and it like completely changed her life.
Yeah.
In how she looked at the world, because these kids who were incredibly poor had absolutely nothing, and just what we could do to put some glass in the windows and put a little paint around and interact with these people who were amazing little human beings.
Yeah, they were. I've seen the videos. They were so grateful, and they were just. It was just such a happy community. Like you look at a community like that, and you think from the outside, wow, they live pretty hard lives. But it turns out they tend to be the happiest people. Like
with
are the
so
people
little.
who exactly. They just kind of have each other, and they work with what they have. And since I guess they don't really know what life, like the other half of it, they don't really know, kind of like, I don't want to say what they're missing, but they don't really know
that exists.
they don't.
And it just goes to show that material goods and stuff doesn't bring you a happiness. It's nice to have comforts and have your needs met, but beyond that, we live in this society of stuff. And that's part of the beauty of the farm here is, and really the whole program, we kind of run it on donations, a lot of it. And so a lot of times we don't have the perfect solution, but we have to get creative and problem solve. And it's like, well, we don't have exactly what we need, but we have this and that, and we can make it work. And that's part of all those things that we were talking about, collaboration, everybody has a voice, everybody has an idea. And it's not adult driven. It's like, I totally trust you guys will figure this out, and you always do. Always do.
Yeah. And that's you keep leading into all my questions. I think it's great. Yeah, my next one is, Maria Montessori. She emphasizes the importance of, quote, observing as a Montessori teacher and not interfering with their learning. So I was just interested in, like, from a Montessori teacher perspective, can you explain why observation of the Montessori student is more important than constant instruction? You talked about the students learning from each other. When you do step away, do they kind of just automatically take that role of just, like, do the older students take over, or is it younger students, or is it kind of mixed?
I'd say it's mixed, and it's where the personality comes out. So, Maria Montessori always said, follow the child. So really let that being be who they are supposed to be, versus as an outside adult imposing who I think you should be, which I think is very much our education system in a traditional way, is that we're really trying to make people the same sorts of thinkers. If we're sort of driving them all in the same direction, where Montessori is much more about honoring the individual. And my job is creating a safe place to be that individual, but also allowing that individual to be who they are. And so that's where the observation comes in, is just noticing, just observing. And then going back to that question of who do you want to be, we do student-run conferences and a lot of self-reflection. Rarely are those not in alignment with my observations, what the students have to share. So a lot of it sometimes is just saying, well, here's something that I've observed about you. And it's often spot on with how they're thinking. It usually goes in the opposite order of they share that, and then I'll say, I've observed that. Yeah. So I think it really is honoring. One of the largest differences is Montessori is process-based and our traditional system is product-based. And we're all about process. And there is no product. There's no end game to who you become and growing and learning. I hope you're doing all those things to the day you die, and if you're 110. So it's your life process, your evolution as a being. And like you were saying, you have all these different interests. Some you're going to be able to follow at different times, and it's going to spark and open a door to a new interest that you want to evolve into. You don't want to be stagnant. But I think our traditional system is a product. You're supposed to, like you were saying, you're supposed to get these grades and these scores and get into these level college, or you're supposed to be on this track, and then you graduate from college and you know what your career is going to be, and you have one career and you do it for the rest of your life until you retire, and
that's what they tell you.
And I just don't believe in any of that. I've done so many different things all my life. And they've all sort of been just an evolution of one thing opened a door to another thing, and I'm like, well, this looks fantastic, let's do this. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that we're process oriented. But in life, hopefully people are aware and kind of paying attention to what's going on beyond themselves, and that includes other people, but also just what's going on sort of in the environment. And I think that's particularly hard at this age. But so as adults, just watching, again, it goes back to sort of that quiet space just to be and allow things to be as they are and notice them. And you learn a tremendous amount in just observing. You think about how much we've learned about nature and animals just by watching them. We can't have a conversation with them and ask them how they're feeling today and what they're thinking about, right? We just watch them. So there's just tremendous power in observation.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting that when I was in the lower school, we would have parents or come in that were interested in sending their children to Montessori, and they would just sit for, I think it was like a half hour, not too long, but they would just kind of sit and they would observe the classroom, and I kind of overheard them sometimes if I was out in the hallway, and I could hear them say like, wow, these kids are very focused on what they're doing, like they're very, like they are like communicating with each other and they are having lessons with teachers, but they were also just so focused on just their own like thing that they happen to be doing. But it was just, it's amazing how like even someone who's never seen a class like a Montessori classroom before, they come in for 30 minutes and their minds are just blown. They're like, wow, that's crazy, because you go to different schooling and it's more, I would say, chaotic maybe, but yeah, I mean,
and I think the big difference there is student-centered versus teacher-centered. I have people come in all the time and they're like, where's the teacher? And I'm like, I'm right here. And they're like, oh, there's no desk, there's no front of the room, there's none of that. And so it's student-centered. It's the students driving what, they're interested in. And people are naturally curious beings. And if we're allowed to follow that, we want to deeply engage with whatever it is that we're working with. And, accomplishment comes from working hard on something, putting a lot of time and energy into it. If something's easy for us, you don't really feel very accomplished. But when we put a lot of time into something, and effort and energy, we feel very accomplished. And I think that that's something that we're able to tap into versus a teacher-oriented or adult-oriented, where you're kind of like trying to manage people. This is more following who these people are. Yeah. I don't manage them. We need to function as a community. There are very clear boundaries, just like there are in society. I might feel like going 70 miles an hour down the road that's 50 might not go so well for me, Yeah. No, that's a very interesting way of looking at Montessori teaching. I've never really thought about it this deeply before. It's crazy how it goes into it, but and how much you having been through the Adolescent program, my response to, hey, you have to manage all your time. So everything's due at the end of the week. And it's not little 45 minutes of this, 45 minutes of that kind of thing. You decide when you're getting those lessons. You decide how you're planning your time. But also your problem solving. If a student is super stressed at the end of the week and said, there's no way I'm going to get this particular thing done, my response is not, oh, well, you get an F, or I come up with a plan. My response is, so what's your plan? And most often you've got a really good plan. Like, I'm going to plan on finishing it up over the weekend and by Monday it's going to be done, or whatever it is, or the dirty dishes in the sink is not my problem to solve. It gets put out to the group. How are we going to deal with this? So that's very different than imposing rules and boundaries and consequences that really don't, the idea is to learn, is not to, if you don't meet a deadline, you just fail, or you don't understand it, you fail, and we move on anyway. That doesn't make any sense to me. Right. Like, so you didn't understand it, so let's just keep going. Hopefully you'll catch on. Hopefully you'll catch up sometime. Yeah. It's like, no, you didn't understand it. Let's revisit and really learn it so that we can move forward. Yeah. So all of that comes from the student, and then the student is empowered. Now you're in charge of your learning. I'm not the one who's dictating what you do. And often if we, there's in the past, we've had issues with, computer use or phones, and again, the question is out to the group, how are we going to deal with this? Because I don't want to be the police. That's not my job. How are you going to manage yourselves and then they come up with a plan. And like everything in life, you try it out, and if it needs tweaking or changing, you change it.
Yeah.
But as you enter into the workforce, things tend to be project based. I need this done by such and such a time, and you have to figure out how you're going to do that. And if you're not going to meet a deadline, you need to communicate with the team of people it's going to affect and say, hey, I'm realizing this is larger than I thought. Here's my plan. Is that going to work for everybody? Because it's going to influence impact other people. That's how the world works. Not, oh, sorry, you got an F for today. We're not doing that project anymore.
Or you get fired.
Or, you get fired,
yeah.
or whatever. So like we're much more empowering students that this is your life, and we're trying to give you skills to manage your life. So it's all student based, not adult based at all.
Yeah. And you mentioned kind of, the students get X amount of work that they need to get completed before the end of the week. I mean, I've been through this, but just for people who don't know the process of adolescent learning, can you kind of walk through what it's like to go through a week in the adolescent classroom?
Yeah.
I know in adolescence, you kind of teach, you teach a little bit of biology and pre-algebra and things like that. So how do you kind of weave regular schooling into, not regular schooling, but the traditional way of schooling kind of into Montessori? Because I know that you're not only teaching Montessori students, you're also preparing them for the next level of education that they're going to pursue.
Yeah. And the reality is, other than a few exceptions, they're all going into a traditional system. So I definitely take that seriously. In a true, pure, there are some Montessorians who would not support using electronics because Maria Montessori wouldn't have done that. Well, there was a lot that didn't exist when Maria Montessori was alive. But I think it would be an injustice not to prepare people for how do you, work on a computer, and how do you use, we happen to use Google Classroom as a platform of just kind of how we communicate things. But so our academics very much mirror, especially ninth grade who are getting high school credit, very much mirror the public school, but Virginia state standards, and then we have the ability to modify if somebody's is going into a different system. So like, for example, you went into Wakefield, which had a slightly different ninth grade credits, and so we modified that.
Right, yeah.
You did World History 2 instead of World History 1. Things like that. You did biology instead of geology. But generally speaking, on a large, I sort of see it as the scaffolding. We follow all the Virginia state standards and kind of traditional curriculum. Ninth grade, kind of working backwards. So ninth grade, you are doing a minimum of completing Algebra 1. However, I've had many students complete geometry, and I've had one student complete Algebra 2 as a ninth grader. Science, you're doing geology unless where you're headed has a different science curriculum than ninth graders are getting. History, we do World History 1, again, unless where you're headed has a different curriculum. And then English 9 is English 9. It's really reading, writing, and we teach that as humanities, so it's integrated as part of kind of history and English are a broader overview. Then we do PE, so you get PE credit. We do art, so you get art 1 credit. And we do Spanish over the 3 years. So by the time you've graduated, you've completed the curriculum for Spanish 1. If somebody has the ability to do Spanish 2, or for example, I have a fluent native speaker, when she gets to that point, maybe she's ready to go into Spanish 3 or 4 because she's really working on reading and writing, not so much language.
Yeah.
Have I forgotten any areas? We also do drama. So a typical day, which kind of leads into a typical week, is every morning we have morning meeting, and that's maybe 15 minutes. Sometimes we get into really juicy conversations and it goes longer. But it's anything kind of logistical, who's doing chores that day, which they decide a system. The students decide what the system is that they want to use. Who's going to go have the lower L kids read to them, all that kind of thing. Just logistics of the day, maybe logistics of the week, anything in particular that's come up in curriculum. And then we have a 3-hour work time. So from really 9 to noon is just uninterrupted work time. If you need a math lesson, you ask, or there might be a small group who decides, hey, at 10 o'clock, let's do a math lesson. Or there might be a discussion seminar and the students decide, hey, let's do our seminar at 11. Or let's do it at 11 on Thursday. And then we have lunch and recess, and then the afternoons are more or less what we call specials. So that's where your art, drama, PE, and Spanish come in. So they're still focused on those particular items. And at the end of the day, everybody has a job that they do to clean the house, and those rotate. And again, the students decide how that system works. And then they head out for the day. Or they do chores again, the ones who are on chores, and head out for the day. Our 7th and 8th grade curriculum does rotate a little bit. So math, we really hope our goal is that everybody's at least doing pre-algebra. So we do a year and a half of pre-algebra, a year and a half of algebra 1, unless you're on a faster track. And if you're ready to go on a faster track, you go for it. The humanities tends to be civics and government or American history, and it just rotates, and it doesn't matter what year you enter at. The science is biology or environmental science, and again, it rotates, doesn't matter which year you enter at.
Yeah.
So we do have a very specific curriculum. The way in which we approach it is less adult driven and more student driven. So there'll be a lot of projects where there'll be some instructions, maybe a short lesson, or it may not even need one, and there might be some choice in it, but the content is kind of going for the same content, so that the students don't depend on a teacher to move forward. So things like the first few weeks of school, this year is biology, so we're doing the cell. So first you draw a diagram of, you choose a plant or an animal cell. You label it. You have to figure out what each of those things actually do. You make a 3D model, and then the sort of culminating thing is you do a cell analogy with a partner, which I always mix partners up so everybody works with everybody at different times. And you compare a cell to the functioning of something you choose. So this year was, there was a factory, there was actually Disneyland, there was a car, so that you really show that through this whole process, which has taken several weeks, I understand how a cell works, and the function of a cell. So that's kind of a typical, doesn't need a lot of adult instruction, but there's a lot of skills that grabs onto to go through that whole process. And
right.
The assessment, which is not a grade, but a presentation, becomes very clear that you understand how a cell works or you don't.
Yeah, you definitely tell right away if someone turns something in and you're like, okay, elaborate, and they're like, well,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I totally understand. It's more of an open-ended type of learning these subjects, but it's also it also has guidelines and
Yes.
times where instruction is needed, of course.
Yeah.
But it's kind of up to the student to kind of ask if they need help, and if someone
Right.
is struggling or you observe that they are, you just kind of step in and help when needed. And I think that's really important. Is also like not so much instructing them right away, but waiting for them to come to you,
Yeah.
and waiting for that kind of thing to click in their minds where they're like, okay, yeah, now I really like do need help, or I need some
And that
further
again
instruction.
is a skill that is uncomfortable at first. To ask for help means I don't understand. Well, remember, we're not supposed to be here because we already know it. We're here to learn it.
Yeah.
So that's okay. Like, that's exactly where we want you to be. Is, I've tried my own resources. I've perhaps asked another student, and now we're confused and we don't know where to go. So like math is a great example. If people are working together, they're doing math together, maybe they're arguing over an answer. So they go back, they re-go through their process again. They still don't get to agree on something. They can't figure out where the glitch is.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're just confused on the process at that point. So that's when they might reach out and say, there's something that we're not picking up here. And so what we do is we just go back through the process again together. And they're going to immediately see and own where something went off course.
Mm-hmm.
So that's their process, not my process. And
Yeah.
I'm not at the board saying, okay, everybody keep up. And if you don't, well, sorry, we're going anyway.
Erasing. Yeah. No, yeah. One thing that I've observed is the difference between Montessori lifers and students who have just started to come in, like in 8th grade. And the next question is kind of like, what have you observed in older Montessori students, and how are Montessori lifers different than students who start Montessori later in life? For example, like in high school years, I would say. So like if you get a student who's been in Montessori all the way through primary, versus someone who just started, maybe even in 9th grade, and they're like, what is this? I've never had this type of learning before where, I get X amount of work and I need to do it. Like, where's the I don't want to say organization, but where's the structure to it?
Somebody telling me what to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that students can get kind of lost when they're just kind of thrown in this environment, and they kind of just need to kind of, I don't want to say catch up, but they kind of need to be like taught a little bit and kind of figure that out. So I don't know if you observed.
And I think everybody's different, because I think you're pulled to I think Montessori works best, like most things in life, if it's already in alignment with who you are, who your family is, and then you kind of realize, oh, there's this thing called Montessori that matches that. It's not that you're trying to become something you aren't naturally. And that was my experience when we sort of found Montessori. It was like, oh, so that's what you call us. That's how we function as a family. That's how we sort of function as individuals. Here's some things that we value. So I think that those, regardless of where you come in, those are the students and families that have the most success, because it's already kind of in alignment with who they are and how they approach life. Maybe their child is already more involved in decision making at home, or responsibilities, or contributing, or has more of a voice, or whatever it might be. I think obviously not every system works for everybody. Some people, it's too much choice. It's too much responsibility. They need a tighter structure. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be for everybody.
Yeah.
But people who are really ready to kind of take responsibility for themselves, their own learning. I think it does really work well for it. I've had a lot of kids come in as 7th graders out of the public system and completely embrace it because it's refreshing. They feel in control of their own being, really, not just their learning, but everything. There's no straight rows and, hallway passes, and like if you need a break and you need to go hang out with the pigs, have at it.
Yeah.
And kids do it every day.
Yeah.
But you're still responsible for your work. So like in life, we have to make those decisions every moment. I really want to do this, but I really got to do this.
Yeah.
That's hard. That doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in general, I would say that people who really have embraced Montessori, wherever they've come along the line, really are confident. They know themselves well. They can interact with any age group, which I think is the beauty. We've lost the extended families and neighborhoods. And so we have people who can have a perfectly comfortable conversation with an older adult or a really young kid and everybody in between. So that there's really that aspect that I think is great. I think Montessori kids tend to feel comfortable voicing their opinion, and if we've done our job well, they do it in a really respectful way, and they're also really open to hearing somebody else's. Even if they don't agree, they're at least open to hearing and trying to understand it.
Yeah.
I can't say that I always notice at my level kids who have either been in the system the whole time or not, because if it's a good match, they're so ready for it. They're so eager for it. I have 2 students this year who are out of the public system. One, the public system was fine, but had an older sibling and really wanted this experience and knew their older sibling had gone through it. The other one, the public system just didn't work for them. And they've gone from a really unhappy person to completely happy, which if you're happy, things must be right.
Yeah.
Something's got to be going well,
Yeah.
You're not happy if you're feeling sort of beat up in a system, not just socially or academically, but just, can just be themselves. So I think probably in some of the upper L and down, you would notice it more because it's more material based. And so the materials are something they're familiar with through the whole system, where in adolescence, they've kind of grown out of materials. We will use it a little bit here and there, but for the most part, the students are ready to sort of have, those materials they feel like are for the young kids. And also they're stretching into the abstract. That's what happens in this plane of development. You're going from concrete to abstract, and it's such a cool, exciting time to talk about, at a morning meeting might be logistics, but it also might get into some really interesting conversation on a current event or some crazy thing I throw out to them about, like, what would you do in this situation? And
I remember those discussions.
Yeah, and there's no right or wrong,
Yeah.
but it's like really stretching your thinking and going from black and white, there's right and wrong, to, most of the world is gray and it's way more complicated than I thought.
Yeah.
And as I always say, it's always more complicated than you think, and you actually never know what's really going on with somebody, because it appears one way, but underneath that they might be feeling something totally different, and we can't really know. So don't make assumptions. So it's just a really exciting time of life where that brain is exploding, but you're going places now as an independent thinker and getting stretched in ways that are like exciting and juicy, and the ideas, you sort of plant these seeds and somebody's going to continue to think about that later, versus just check it off. I've done that.
Yeah.
Recycle.
It's the difference between a yes and no question and a question that requires more thought and more reflection. I think they make the most interesting conversations, obviously.
Yeah.
But I remember we would always talk about current events, and you would just open the question to be like, well, what do you think about it? And it could sometimes last 2 minutes, or it could last half hour.
Right.
It all just depends on
And that's the beauty. You go with it. There's no bell that says, "Oh, sorry, you really want to talk about this, but now we got to go off to science class." It's like you allow that to happen because it comes from the students, and they want to follow. So you follow it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you follow the child.
Yeah.
Or the opposite. You're like having a discussion and everybody's just glassy eyed, and it's like, okay, I think we're done. It's okay. Like. Yeah. I'm feeling fried too. We can all just stop and let's do something else.
It's important to know when they're just not feeling it. I've definitely. I think we've all had those days where we're just like, this is an interesting conversation, just not right now.
Not right now.
I've been kind of researching both sides of Montessori. And, critics of Montessori schools, they've kind of complained that because students are given so much freedom to choose what they study, certain students will not master certain areas of curriculum when they're not interested in it. So I don't know if there's something you can speak to on that, just because, if they're having, let's say you have math and science and history to do, and you love history, and you just that's all you want to do is history, but then you forget about everything else, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's Friday, I haven't done anything, and it's just crazy, or you might just really not like that subject and not want to learn about it.
Right.
How do you kind of steer them away from that perspective? Because I know when I was in public school, I didn't really enjoy education. I wasn't happy with it. Like the student you mentioned, it just didn't really work for me. So my parents were like, we're moving and we're going to this Montessori school because I want you to like education. And so I ended up liking education because of it. But I was just wondering if
I still think you get that in any system, particularly graded system. You have kids who the subject is easy because they're truly curious. They're interested in it. If something's interesting, it's easier for us. And then maybe a kid doesn't pay attention to another one and they don't do well, quote unquote well in it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, you're responsible to all of your work. And in life, I don't love everything I do. There's plenty of things in life I'm like, I need to do this. I don't really want to do it, but I need to do it. So that's okay in itself, And again, it goes back to kind of knowing yourself, but also accepting your responsibilities. But also, to me, if students aren't engaging in something, not that they have to fall in love with it, but are engaged and find it interesting, I've done something wrong. There's something that I'm not catching them on. And not to say every single lesson or every single piece, but I think you saw there were a lot of kids who came in and were like, I don't really like history. Mm-hmm. But the way history was taught and with the passion it was taught, people are like, history is really pretty cool.
Yeah.
But all it said to me was like, you're meeting them where they are. You're creating something to make it interesting. And if you are passionate about something and have interest in it, that is contagious to people around you. So I think a lot of it is not so much the subject, but how we're going about teaching it. Because I think humans are curious people. Yeah. And if you can make it relatable, and that's why I used earlier real and meaningful work. If it's not real and meaningful, who cares? And I had that experience.
Yeah.
So if it's real and meaningful, why do we run these businesses? Beyond connecting to the social world, like they're making all their decisions with their bank account how they spend their money, how they make their income, how they track their money. That's real and meaningful, you know, opposed to let's do a worksheet and pretend that we sell t-shirts.
Yeah.
You know, who cares? You know,
It's different
but
when
if
you're
it's
actually going out there.
impacting me
Yeah.
because I manage it, it's very different. So I think in either
Consequences
system,
too.
yeah, in either system you get the same. You know, it's a natural thing that people are pulled to one thing over another, but often you're not pulled to something because you have a bad experience, and often it goes back to, you know, when you ask anybody about what they remember from their years in middle school down, what they remember are their teachers and their relationship with their teachers. So if they had a teacher that they really liked or really didn't like, determined if they liked that subject or not. It really wasn't about math or science or history. It was really about that person. So to me, that if we're meeting the individuals and the students where they are, they're naturally going to engage in it, like you were talking about with younger kids being so focused. Even though they might spend a little more time on this because it's more interesting than that, or a particular assignment over another, that's a natural thing. We do that all the time, you know, as humans.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's more the system than necessarily the philosophy, if that makes sense. Because I'm sure you've had teachers who maybe the subject wasn't something you were thrilled about, but the teacher was fantastic. And you were like, wow, this is actually really interesting. Or they make it interesting. Or the opposite, something that you really had been interested in and you get a dud. And it's like, this is painful.
Definitely happy, yeah.
You know, and that's certainly happened to me, and will certainly, you know, you pick your college classes based on the professors, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we as educators did a better job of meeting students kind of where their curiosities are and make it intriguing and interesting versus a grade of kind of dry, boring curriculum, either system would be more successful. And I think that's what Montessori tries to do, at least at my level, really tries to, because you're still responsible for your math lessons every week. You're still responsible for your history and English every week. You're still responsible for your science, you know. And even if you don't like it or don't connect with it, then again, that's part of our conversation and process, is kind of like learning about yourself. What is it that I'm not connecting with? You know, maybe how my brain works, or maybe just my interest right now, or I can't really relate to this right now, or this doesn't have meaning to me in my larger life, or
And no, I think definitely teacher impact is a huge thing, because you know, if a teacher isn't excited about teaching the information, it can be kind of, you know, it can kind of take the focus off of the academics, and more emotion wise you're kind of already drained before you even start.
Right.
And I'm a performer, you know, I'm on stage at least, you know, a few times a month, and I've noticed that, like, you know, certain younger singers that haven't really done it before, like they'll get on stage and they'll be like really shy with the mic, and they won't really like dance or do anything. And then other like older students or students who have more experience, they'll kind of jump around while they're singing, they'll dance, and it makes the environment that much more like happy and just full of life, because you know you're just expressing the joy that you feel with that, you know, one thing that you're doing,
and it's contagious.
It can be contagious. That's exactly.
I mean, imagine going to, you know, a concert of a great singer who's sort of standing there and
very reserved.
There's a blank state, you know, opposed to somebody who's a fantastic sort of puts on a fantastic show, but maybe their talent isn't quite as high. Like, that's really going to intrigue you. Yeah. You know, is that passion that comes out of them. And, you know, when people are passionate about something, it I don't know, it always makes me excited about it, even if I don't even really know why I'm excited about it yet.
Yeah, it shows. It's definitely, it can make things interesting, or it can, you know, it's just like so weird mentally, where teachers and students really have to either connect, or if they don't, it can be an issue. And like you said, but yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that's tricky about adolescence. Is just it's a tricky age. It's a delicate age, but it's really a super exciting age. And so I have to have very clear boundaries and very clear standards. But I also want my students to know when you can be open and honest, we can work through anything. And I'm totally there for you. But if you are, sort of sneaky and don't take responsibility for yourself, I don't care if people make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but own it. And then we can work through it. Or you're struggling with something or whatever. So that relationship to me is so important. And over 3 years, as you know, we know each other pretty well.
Yeah.
But, you want, it's a powerful relationship. I mean, there hasn't been a graduation I haven't cried. These are people that impact my life. I'm not just impacting them. Every day, the students rise me up too. I learn something from them every day because they hold me to a higher standard.
Yeah. And
if things aren't going well, we've definitely had our bumpy times. It's I constantly say, what am I missing? What am I not doing? Where am I not meeting them to make this what it should be, But isn't that what we should all be doing? All the time?
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree with everything that you're saying. Yeah, no, Montessori experience is just so out of this world. It's
and all my alums come back, and I feel close to them, and I love that. My oldest ones are, Mason and Peter, who are in their second year of college.
Yeah.
But if they're around, they come back and we sit down and we talk and we check in, and I text people all the time, and Courtney, I've totally helped her find her way through college, and even Nora and I had this great conversation the other day. These are important people in my life. It's not just one time I had a girl, I think her name was Eve, and it's these are people who are in my life and are going to stay in my life.
You get to know them not just for an hour a day, but really for 3 years of their lives. You're with them. And you go on
trips with them, and you're not just a teacher. You're cooking food together and running a farm together and traveling together and doing things out in the community together.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's very much like a second family, and it's definitely a very kind environment and a very, I'd say stress-free for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah. I think that's all the questions that I have for today.
Cool.
But thank you so much, and you are a huge inspiration, and thank you for doing this
with me.
Well,
if anything else just pops up, hey, I never really addressed this, or I'm more curious about this or that. I do think the hard thing with the adolescents is there just aren't a lot of programs. I feel like the one I was in previously, like I said, was much more traditional, just because they were all going on to these private New England schools.
Yeah.
Sorella was the only child who went to public school out of a class of 32.
Oh, wow.
So
they all just chose to go international?
And a lot of them were going off to, boarding schools and da-da-da. So it was a very different clientele. So I got that. You do have to balance that. But I think the fact that we can have a farm, I went to a conference with Edel some years ago. Do you remember when we went down to New Orleans?
Yeah, I remember that.
But I was I felt like we were so far ahead of all these other adolescent programs. They were we're growing tomato plants. I'm great.
Yeah.
They were just trying to figure out. So I feel like having the land, having sort of, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be, the education and the farm component, just together, And you know me, I'm a visionary. Like, I just always want to do more stuff. The international trips, all of that, you know, are so unique. And I think very few adolescent programs get to actually live what their dream would be, just because they're restricted, you know, from their environment. And I think it's great that urban programs can figure out some kind of business. But how do you stay connected with nature when you're living in concrete? You know, it's just like a whole different environment.
Yeah.
So
definitely have to think about location in terms of when you're building a Montessori school. And I know that we have the farm, we have turkeys, chickens, pigs, and well, not anymore, but you guys, like, you have
goats at one point.
Goats, yes. And you guys just kind of have like the resources to do that. I think that's very precious. That's not something that a lot of people have the opportunity to do. And I just think that this school is just a huge inspiration for adolescent classes that just aren't quite there, but like, you know, that's kind of why I wanted to write about Mountainside, is because it's just so, maybe it's like further along than others, like you said. It's not. I feel like we're more in alignment with what Maria Montessori's vision would have been in the 21st century, because, you know, technology does drive. We do have a huge responsibility to that. I have to be realistic about the world we live in, kind of thing. And the one other piece I would add, I guess, is that part of finding your role in society and your place in the world, we want students to leave here feeling an obligation to their community, that you are a community member and you work with your larger community. So, which is why we do so much community things. If it's road cleanup to food bank to, you know, working with the African American Historical Society on the Morgantown School, you know, things evolve that come up, and we have these opportunities to really immerse ourselves. And it's a partnership, not just, oh, we went to the food bank once and we check it off the box, you know. Yeah.
Like this last year, we went, again, still some restrictions around COVID of kind of what we could do, but then we wrote a grant because we were going to raise a pig to donate to the food bank.
Oh, that's
Unfortunately, we didn't get the grant, but what a great process that the kids went through.
Yeah.
And who's to say we won't get it later?
Definitely, yeah.
You know, but like, we have an obligation to our neighbors who don't have the resources that we do. And we just raised our turkeys, and we're donating the few turkeys we didn't sell, we ended up not selling to the food bank. And rather than pushing them to sell, the students were like, let's donate them to the food bank.
Yeah.
So to me, that's fantastic. You know, so that you are a community member who you give what you can, and sometimes it's time, and sometimes it's finances, but most often it's time and resources, you know, of like what we did in Costa Rica. We can paint. Let's do it. You
definitely.
know?
And I remember her name was Cindy, right, at the food bank. I remember I go there sometimes because my mom is involved with community gardens and doing all that, and sometimes we donate food, and like, she remembers me, like, she remembers my name, she remembers my face, and like the fact that like we went there and we built that relationship with people in our community, you know, it has benefits. Like, we can reach out to more people through their connections, and they can use our connections, and it works both ways, and it's a friendship that we've built with all of these local businesses, like Field and Main. You know, we do the restaurant thing where we raise a pig, and we do the farm to table process. That's super important, how, you know, the children raise the animal, they take care of it, they feed it every day, and then, you know, they go through the processing, but they don't actually do it. But then, you know, you get to go to a restaurant, you get to prepare it, and then you get to serve it. And you get to see the entire process from A to Z. And it's just, it's such a valuable thing that, like, nobody goes through that. Like, I remember I was on a rock climbing team, however many years ago, and I was telling my friends how I was I had raised a pig and we were gonna prepare it and we were gonna do seedlings the next night. And they were like, "Oh my God, you raised a pig and you're selling it? And that's so sad. Like, why are you doing that?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, like, you go to the grocery store, you get a pig. Where do you think it comes from? Like,
right. Or you go to a restaurant.
Exactly, a restaurant. Like, it's just the process of like how society works. You might not like how it happens and how these things turn out, but that the reality of it, that's just how the world works. And it's important to kind of see that side of it because, you know, not many people get the privilege of knowing where their food comes from, as you've said, and that's just a huge impact that's for me. But
and also you get in that process, one of the really important things is that adolescents need to be working with professionals in their field, and you get to work with professionals in their field. You work with Joffrey as a butcher, you know, and an amazing chef, and these chefs and these servers and, you know, all those things. And then, you know, you take a week and do an internship where you just immerse yourself in, you know, work with somebody who's a professional in their field in some career path, you know, which is super cool. I also think that we're so removed from life and death. You know, when you're pregnant, you're like a medical condition. And dying is something to fear, and farming, it's just a cycle of life, and it's okay, you know, it's okay, and you can be close to it without it being completely scary and petrifying, you know, or like our turkeys just left this morning, and there were a few people who came out to help load them. And it was completely choice. I'm not going to force everybody to. But if that's the closest that you've ever been to death, that's something to embrace. You know, life and death are the same. They're opposite each other. And that's a really important thing to learn. Like, don't fear these things. And like you said, you know, these turkeys lived an incredible life. We took care of them. We watched them grow. And they're going to go and feed an incredible amount of people after having lived an incredible life. Like, what lucky birds. You know?
And I remember, like, what you emphasized, like, so much when I was coming here is, like, we gave them a better life than they would have had, you know? And in some ways, we did save some of the animals. I mean, obviously, we were getting them from Ayrshire, and it was a nice place where they were. But if you think about, like, commercial, you know, farming, it's ridiculous what goes on. It's absolutely terrible, and it's
and
wrong.
Now they've, you know, fertilized a whole section of the land that now gets to sit and rest and take that all in and come back healthy. And you know, it's like it's such a complex system that's delicate and important, you know. So so working with professionals in the field is a real gift as well. You know?
And doing seedlings, it made me want to become a waitress. Like now I'm like, and I did it once and I was hooked. I mean, I was working with people in our community and people from our schools and their families and parents. So obviously it was a nice nice environment. But now all I've wanted to do is be a waitress and interact with people and you know, like talk with people through their days and just like be within the community. And same thing with, I think, like one of my internships was with a blacksmith, and that was just like an incredible experience where, you know, I would have never, you know, I've always been interested in the skill of being a blacksmith, but I've never had the opportunity to pursue that. And Miss Adele, she's like, I know a guy. I can help you out with that. So just. And
you were his last student.
Oh, I was?
Yeah, he's retired, and I don't know. I think he's still doing a little bit on his own, but he's just not taking people in anymore. So I mean, and he's so cool.
He was incredible. Yeah, he made gates like all over these like crazy thing. He was a nice man to work with. He was pretty cool, but.
And a lot of people end up getting jobs out of their internships.
Yeah, like you
Nora too. Right?
Well, Nora, she did her after going through Montessori like I did, and I'm going back to it as well. I'm here writing a thesis about my experiences, but she chose to write her thesis on sustainable development and just kind of crops and farming and things like that. And now she's learning about sustainable development. But so I think that's interesting. But Anyway,
Well,
Yeah.
anything else that comes up, just feel free to reach out.
okay.
And we can get together again or talk on the phone or email or whatever.
Yeah, well, thank you
So.
so much. And
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's kind of fun to talk about it.
Yes.